Hey everybody, this is going to be a quick lesson on beaming of notes so that you can be set up for success on exercise 8 of grade 1 music theory. So before we begin our lesson on beaming, we need to remember a couple of things. We talked in the last video about how when we have notes that are of less than one beat, that they like to be beamed together and grouped together. So we're going to be grouping all of these notes together and putting them together in one beat groupings and sometimes in 2 beat groupings. So I'll explain those in just a moment. The other thing that we need to remember is our stem direction. So stem direction is quite important. If we have our musical staff, we have our 5 lines of our musical staff, then anytime that we have a note on the middle line or above, then our stem direction goes down. Anytime we have a note on the middle line and below, the stems go up. Then the middle line stems can be either direction. We'll say stems either up or down. It depends on the context and whether the notes are going up or the notes are going down. So if we have a quarter note that's on the 4th line, then our stem would go down. Notice it's on the left-hand side of the note head. If I have a note here that's on the 2nd line, then my stem will go up. So we just need to remember those. And then either in the middle, if it's this note or this passage is going down, so I'd probably write this note on the left, but it would look equally okay if I wrote it on the right. So I could get rid of the other one and write it on the right-hand side as well. So it really depends on the context. So that's just stem direction. Now, for beaming, remember if we have our, say, 8th notes, when we have a single 8th note, it is just with a flag, but we would combine these 2 notes together to make 2 beamed 8th notes. So whenever those two 8th notes are together, we group them together. If we have our 16th notes with 2 flags, when we beam them together, now we need to make sure that we have 2 lines for or 2 beam lines, so that we have our 2 beam lines for our 4 16th notes. So there we have how we're simply going to beam our notes together. Super easy. Instead of writing it with flags, we join it together with 1 line, or if it's 16th notes, with 2 lines. Then we have some other rules that we kind of need to go over. We don't always have just simple only 8th notes and only 16th notes. So we have some other possible combinations. If we had an 8th note with 2 16th notes, then in order to beam these together, we would need to join them in a different way. So we'll join our 8th notes and our 16th notes. And we keep our rhythms kind of separate. So you'll notice that I have the same distance here as what would be my 8th notes, and the same distance here as what would be my 16th notes. So I try to show the beat groupings. If I were to write this as even beat groupings like this makes it more difficult to read. So try to give that little bit of extra space right in between these two so that we see that it's supposed to be an 8th note with 2 16ths. If I have the opposite rhythm, and I have 2 16ths and an 8th, I do the same thing. I have 2 16ths and an 8th note. So I would group those together, and I would put my 2 16ths and my 8th note. So there I have 2/16 and an eighth. If I have a 16th note, an 8th note, and a 16th note, now I would need to break up my beam lines. So I still try to keep the spacing the same, but now I only add part of the beam for the 16th notes. So there I have three possibilities of my 8th note and 16th note groupings. If I have a dotted 8th note and a 16th note, again, now I show that I have a dotted 8th and my 16th note, and I beam it together and I add a small tick. So you can see that for each of these examples where I've split up my 16th notes, I only use a small portion of the beam at the top here. So just a small piece. All right, so that's how we group 8th notes and 16th notes when beaming. This is, of course, only part of your challenge in exercise 8. So the next part of this is we need to look at the context of the music. If the music is going up, then we'll see that our note heads are going up. If that's the case, then my beaming should also mirror that same direction. If my notes are going down, then my beaming should mirror the notes. So I have a downward direction for my beam. So the direction makes that music a little bit easier to read. Either if the notes are going up, pitch is going up, my beams go up. If the pitch is going down, my beam should be pointing downwards. But then what happens if I have notes that are not in maybe the biggest pattern and I have them kind of all over the place? Well, now I would need to show my music in one beam. So I would have one line. So it's most likely going to be, actually this one is a little bit sloppy. Let me redo that one for you. So I would probably need to make sure that my stems are nice and neat, and I'm going to make sure that it's fairly flat across the top. Okay, so if you have notes that are moving up and down, and there's not really a discernible pattern to it, then our beam should be quite flat. But if I have a pattern that's moving in an upward direction, and it keeps going up, then I could still show this pattern going in an upward direction. So this one would be, let's say it's 16th notes. I would show this as going in an upward direction. So it depends on the context of the music. And the same thing, if our stems are going down, it's the same direction. We mirror how the music is moving. If for some reason we need to beam over the top of a rest, we can just shift our rest down a little bit so it doesn't interfere with the beam line. So we don't want to overlap anything when we're writing music. We just want it to be nice and neat. So we would just move our rest down slightly. So if we look at our exercises for lesson 8, then it says copy the following melodies with correct beaming and stem direction. So for this example, I'm going to be looking at the note heads. So let's look at measure 1. So I see that my note heads are moving in an upward direction. So now I'm going to group these by one beat. So I know that my time signature is 2/4. So I have beat 1 and beat 2. So let's start with beat number 1. I'm going to neatly draw my note heads here, and then I will draw my stems, making sure I try to make them as neat as possible. If you have a ruler, you should definitely use it. Then I will add my beam going slightly upward. Now I look at beat number 2. So beat number 2 is still moving up, but I have the middle line and the third space. So now, even though this stem is going up, when I beam it, I'm going to want it to go down to match the third space C. So I'll take my pencil and I'll draw my note head again. And now I add my stems, but this time going down, but still allowing it to have an upward direction. And I draw my beam. So that's how I would draw my first measure. Notice that I've grouped these by the beats that I see in my measure. So I have beat number 1 and beat number 2. You'll do the same in measure number 2. So now we'll need to know that we have half a beat, a quarter of a beat, and a quarter of a beat, all totaling 1 beat. So now I'm going to draw my same note heads again, but this time going up, starting here on the B, C, and D. Try my best to emulate the spacing of the notes. So I might want to move this one over just slightly to make sure I see that pattern of 1/8 and 2/16. This one is nice. I already know that the stems should be going down, so I draw my stem, stem 1, stem 2, stem 3. Then I make my upward direction. So I draw here, and then I'll add a second line to show the 16th notes. So there I have my 1/8 and 2/16 rhythm. So you can easily accomplish these. Just look at, again, the direction of the notes. This one is moving in an upward direction. This one is staying the same. Then this one is moving down, and this one has a big jump down. All right, I'm sorry, I missed the dot on that one. So down, and then also moving in a downward direction. These are staying the same, and this is a little bit tricky. Now we have a quarter note which won't have a beam. So you'll have to take a look closely at those note values in order to accomplish this task. So you have beats in 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4 time. Then, as we move on, exercise 2, these will contain errors in beaming and stem direction. So you'll need to look carefully, and then you'll have to rewrite the whole melody in order to correct the mistake. So I would start by first drawing the bar lines, and you can line them up neatly. Again, if you have a ruler, it makes it really easy. Then once you've drawn the bar lines, then you can get to work copying that melody, but correcting the mistakes. So there's not necessarily an error in every measure, so you'll just have to look carefully to find out where those errors occur. Remember, the trick being that we should have each grouping should be grouped by beat. So the beams are grouped by beat. All right, so we shouldn't have, as an example in this first measure, this one is hanging out, not beamed with anybody. So that means that something in this first measure isn't grouped by beat. We can see 16th notes that might not be grouped all together here. So you'll have to be a bit of a detective to find which way each of these should be beamed to be considered correct. So again, grouped by beat. And then be careful of the stem direction. Is it supposed to be flat? Is it supposed to be rising? Is it supposed to be falling? You'll have to pay close attention to figure that out. So that's how you complete exercises 1 and 2 of lesson 8, beaming.